Store clerk refuses to serve black woman until he learns her husband owns the chain. The glass doors of Luminescence Boutique reflected the late afternoon sun as Leah Matthews approached the entrance, her heels clicking softly against the polished concrete. The store's pristine windows displayed the latest collection from Paris Fashion Week, each mannequin artfully arranged to catch the eye of passing shoppers. Leah paused briefly to admire an emerald green silk dress, its fabric catching the light in a way that reminded her of the gown she'd worn to last month's charity gala. Inside, the boutique hummed with the quiet energy of exclusive retail, subtle lighting highlighting designer pieces, the faint scent of an expensive fragrance wafting through climate-controlled air. Leah's Cartier watch caught the light as she ran her fingers along a rack of carefully curated blazers, each movement deliberate and graceful. Her own attire, a tailored black pantsuit paired with classic Louboutin pumps, spoke of understated elegance, though this detail seemed lost on the young man lounging behind the counter. Jared Porter had been working at Luminescence for exactly 8 months, and in that time, he'd developed what he considered an expert eye for the store's proper clientele. Leaning against the marble counter, he continued his animated conversation with Emma, another sales associate, about his recent night at an exclusive club. His laughter carried across the store, just a touch too loud for the refined atmosphere, as he deliberately avoided making eye contact with the newest customer. Leah moved through the store with the confidence of someone well-versed in luxury retail, her fingers trailing over fine fabrics while she mentally noted the construction and quality of each piece. When she paused before a display of hand-beaded evening wear, Jared's eyes flicked briefly in her direction before returning to Emma, his lip curling slightly at the corners. And then, he continued, voice pitched to Carrie, she tried to tell me she was a regular customer, as if I wouldn't know all our regulars by now. He emphasized the word regular, with a subtle but pointed glance in Leah's direction. The boutique's soft background music couldn't quite mask the dismissive tone in his voice. Other customers, a pair of older women examining cashmere sweaters, a young socialite trying on sunglasses, pretended not to notice the underlying tension, though their furtive glances betrayed their awareness. After selecting a few pieces, a silk blouse in deep burgundy, a perfectly cut wool blazer, and a pair of tailored trousers, Leah approached the counter. She stood patiently, waiting for Jared to acknowledge her presence. He continued his conversation for several more minutes, each passing moment making his deliberate ignorance more apparent. Finally, Leah cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the polish of someone accustomed to boardrooms and charity galas. "I'd like to try these on, please." Jared turned slowly, his expression a study in practiced disdain. His eyes swept over her selections before meeting her gaze, his lip curling slightly. "These are designer pieces," he said, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child. "The blazer alone is $3,000. Leah's expression remained neutral, though something flickered in her dark eyes. "Yes, I'm aware," she replied calmly. "I'd like to try them on." "Look," Jared said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at one of our other locations. The outlet mall across town has some lovely options that might be more suitable for your budget." The air in the boutique seemed to grow heavier. The socialite at the sunglasses display suddenly became very interested in her phone, while the older women whispered behind their hands. Emma, still standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably but made no move to intervene. Leah's spine straightened imperceptibly, her chin lifting slightly. "I'd like to speak with your manager," she said, her voice level but firm. The words carried the weight of someone used to being heard, used to commanding respect, though this subtle authority seemed lost on Jared. He rolled his eyes, making no attempt to hide his contempt. "Our manager is very busy with important clients right now," he replied, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the store. "Perhaps you could come back another time, when you're more prepared for our price point." The insult hung in the air, sharp and undisguised. Leah's fingers tightened slightly on her Hermes bag, but her expression remained composed. Years of navigating corporate boardrooms and social hierarchies had taught her the power of maintaining dignity in the face of prejudice. "I'll wait," she said simply, each word precise and measured. She placed the clothing on the counter with deliberate care, her movements elegant and controlled. The diamond on her ring finger caught the light, its size and quality unmistakable to anyone who bothered to look. But Jared had already turned away, his attention purposefully directed elsewhere. The boutique's atmosphere had shifted from exclusive to uncomfortable, the tension palpable in the carefully controlled air. Other customers began to drift toward the exits, their shopping interrupted by the unfolding scene. Through it all, Leah stood perfectly still, her presence a quiet challenge to the assumptions being made about her. The boutique's glass doors swung open, admitting a group of women whose designer handbags and obvious plastic surgery marked them as regular clientele. Jared's demeanor transformed instantly, his previous disdain melting into an obsequious smile. "Mrs. Henderson," he called out, abandoning his post behind the counter. "How lovely to see you again. Did those Louboutins work out perfectly for your daughter's wedding?" Leah observed the interaction silently, noting how Jared practically tripped over himself to assist the newcomers. She remained at the counter, her selected items still laid out before her, a quiet testament to the service she'd been denied. The women cast curious glances in her direction, their perfectly maintained eyebrows rising slightly at the tableau before them. "I'll be with you in just a moment," Jared called over his shoulder to Leah, his tone dripping with false politeness. But just a moment stretched into 5 minutes, then 10, as he fawned over Mrs. Henderson and her companions, pulling out additional items for their consideration and laughing too loudly at their mild jokes. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows through the boutique's windows, but Leah remained steady in her resolve. She'd faced similar situations before, board meetings where she was mistaken for the secretary, country club events where she was assumed to be the help, and experience had taught her the power of patience. Mrs. Henderson selected a silk scarf, holding it up to the light. "Jared, darling," she drawled, "be a dear and ring this up for me. I'm running terribly late for tennis." Of course. Jared practically bounded back to the register, pointedly ignoring Leah as he swept past her. He began processing Mrs. Henderson's purchase with flourishing movements, his earlier rudeness now replaced with excessive charm. "Excuse me." Leah's voice cut through the artificial pleasantries, calm but firm. "I've been waiting to make my purchase for quite some time now." Jared's smile tightened at the corners. "As you can see," he replied, his tone acidic, "I'm helping these ladies. Perhaps you could wait your turn?" The emphasis on your carried unmistakable meaning. Mrs. Henderson and her friends exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and barely concealed curiosity. One of them whispered something behind her hand, causing the others to titter nervously. "I've been waiting my turn," Leah responded, her voice level. "For nearly 20 minutes now. I simply wish to try on these items and make my purchase." Jared finished processing Mrs. Henderson's transaction, handing over the signature blue bag with exaggerated care. Then he turned to Leah, his facade of politeness cracking. "Look," he said, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I think we both know this isn't the place for your kind. The items you've selected are clearly out of your price range, and frankly, you're making our regular customers uncomfortable." The words hung in the air like poison, their impact rippling through the boutique. Mrs. Henderson's group lingered near the door, openly watching now, their tennis plans apparently forgotten in favor of the unfolding drama. Leah felt her heart rate quicken, though her exterior remained calm. Years of experience in corporate America had taught her to recognize these moments, when prejudice shed its polite mask and revealed its ugly face. Her fingers brushed against her phone in her Hermes bag, a lifeline to the one person who could transform this situation entirely. "Your assumption about my ability to afford these items," she began, each word precise and measured, says more about you than it does about me. I'd like to speak with your manager. Now." Emma, who had been hovering nearby throughout the exchange, finally stepped forward. "Jared," she murmured, "maybe we should—" "No," he cut her off sharply. "I've dealt with this type before. They come in, waste our time, try on clothes they can't afford, and then complain about the service when we call them out on it." His voice had risen, carrying clearly across the boutique. "I'm not going to apologize for maintaining our store's standards." The afternoon light continued to shift, casting dramatic shadows across the scene. Mrs. Henderson and her friends had given up any pretense of leaving, their tennis appointments clearly forgotten in favor of the unfolding drama. Other customers had begun to gather as well, drawn by the rising tension, creating an impromptu audience for Jared's display of prejudice. Leah's hand closed around her phone, her wedding ring catching the light. The diamond's clarity and size would have told anyone paying attention exactly what they needed to know about her purchasing power. But Jared's assumptions had blinded him to such details. She withdrew the phone slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled, preparing to make a call that would change the entire dynamic of this encounter. "Rachel," Jared's voice carried across the boutique as he called for his manager, his tone a mixture of annoyance and forced professionalism. "Could you come out here for a moment?" The way he emphasized "moment" suggested he expected the matter to be resolved quickly and in his favor. Rachel Parker emerged from the back office, her blonde hair pulled into a severe bun that matched her rigid posture. She'd been managing Luminescence for 5 years, cultivating what she considered an appropriately exclusive atmosphere. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached, taking in the scene before her with practiced efficiency. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice carrying the artificial warmth of someone who had mastered the art of diplomatic dismissal. Her eyes swept over Leah, taking in her appearance with the same prejudiced filter that had colored Jared's behavior. Leah met Rachel's gaze steadily. "Yes, there is," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to boardroom negotiations. "Your employee has refused to serve me, suggested I shop at an outlet mall instead, and made several inappropriate comments about my presence in this store." Rachel's expression shifted subtly, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the same assumptions that had guided Jared's behavior. "I see," she said, though her tone suggested she saw only what she wanted to see. "And you've been waiting to make a purchase." "I've been waiting to try on these items," Leah gestured to the clothing still laid out on the counter, "for nearly 30 minutes now, while watching other customers receive immediate attention." The late afternoon sun streaming through the windows cast Rachel's shadow long across the floor as she positioned herself beside Jared, creating a united front against their unwanted customer. "Well," she began, her voice taking on a patronizing tone, "you must understand that we have certain standards to maintain." Mrs. Henderson and her friends had moved closer again, drawn by the arrival of the manager. Their presence seemed to embolden Rachel, who continued with increasing condescension. "Our clientele expects a certain atmosphere when they shop here. We need to ensure that we're maintaining the appropriate environment for our regular customers." Leah's expression remained composed, though something flickered in her dark eyes. "And what, exactly, makes someone a regular customer?" she asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. "What specific criteria are you using to make that determination?" Rachel shifted uncomfortably, aware that she was skating on thin ice but unable to back down. "Well, we have many loyal customers who appreciate the exclusive nature of our boutique. Mrs. Henderson, for example," she gestured toward the watching group, "has been shopping with us for years." "I see," Leah replied, her voice carrying a hint of steel beneath its polite surface. "And you can determine someone's ability to be a loyal customer simply by looking at them. That's quite a remarkable talent." The tension in the boutique had reached a fever pitch. Emma had retreated to the far corner, pretending to reorganize a display of scarves while casting nervous glances at the confrontation. Other customers had frozen in place, their shopping forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. "I don't appreciate your tone," Rachel said, drawing herself up to her full height. "If you're unhappy with our service, perhaps it would be best if you took your business elsewhere. As Jared suggested, there are other stores that might be more suitable for your needs." Leah reached into her Hermes bag, withdrawing her phone with deliberate slowness. "I think," she said carefully, "that before I do that, I should make a call. Someone else might be interested in hearing about how you determine which customers are suitable for your boutique." Rachel's professional mask slipped further, revealing a flash of uncertainty. "Are you threatening to complain about us? I assure you, our corporate office will fully support our right to maintain appropriate standards for our establishment." A slight smile touched Leah's lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm quite certain they'll be very interested in hearing about those standards," she replied, her finger hovering over her phone screen. "In fact, I think they'll find this entire situation quite enlightening." The sun had shifted again, casting the interior of the boutique in the warm glow of early evening. In this light, the diamond on Leah's wedding ring caught fire, throwing brilliant sparkles across the counter. Rachel's eyes finally landed on it, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her features. "Wasn't I be making this call outside?" Leah announced, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent boutique. "I suggest you use that time to reflect on your definition of suitable customers." With that, she turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the marble floor in a steady rhythm that seemed to count down the moments until everything would change. The evening air had grown cooler as Leah stepped outside the boutique, the glass doors closing behind her with a soft whoosh. She moved a few steps away from the entrance, positioning herself where she could still be seen through the store's windows, but far enough away to ensure privacy. Her fingers moved across her phone's screen with practiced ease, finding her husband's number among her favorites. Christopher Matthews answered on the second ring, his warm baritone carrying through the phone's speaker. "Leah? I thought you were shopping at the new Michigan Avenue location." "I am," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions simmering beneath the surface. "And I think you need to hear about what's happening at your flagship store." Inside, through the boutique's windows, she could see Jared and Rachel watching her, their expressions a mixture of dismissiveness and growing unease. Mrs. Henderson and her friends had clustered near the sunglasses display, not even pretending to shop anymore as they observed the unfolding drama. "Tell me everything," Christopher said, his tone shifting from casual to concerned. Leah could hear him excusing himself from what sounded like a meeting, the background noise fading as he moved to a quieter space. Leah recounted the events of the past hour, her voice remaining measured even as she described the increasingly blatant discrimination she'd faced. She detailed Jared's initial dismissiveness, his pointed suggestions about the outlet mall, and Rachel's subsequent reinforcement of the prejudiced treatment. "They've made it very clear," she concluded, "that someone who looks like me isn't considered suitable for their clientele. The manager even went so far as to suggest that they need to maintain certain standards for their regular customers." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. When Christopher finally spoke, his voice carried the controlled anger of someone who had built his empire on principles of equality and respect. "I'm 3 blocks away," he said quietly. "Stay where you are. I'm bringing Marcus with me." Marcus Chen, the company's head of operations, had been instrumental in implementing Christopher's vision of inclusive luxury retail. The fact that he was being brought in suggested this situation would be addressed at the highest level. Through the windows, Leah could see Jared making exaggerated gestures as he spoke to Rachel, likely constructing his version of events. His confidence seemed to stem from a certainty that whoever Leah was calling would be powerless to affect him. Emma, meanwhile, had begun stress-folding sweaters, her movements becoming increasingly erratic as the tension mounted. "They have no idea who I am," Leah told Christopher, a touch of weariness creeping into her voice. The items I selected are still on the counter. The young man, Jared, seemed personally offended that I would dare to shop here. Well, Christopher replied, and Leah could hear the sound of a car door closing. They're about to find out exactly who they've been dismissing. Marcus has been reviewing the security footage remotely. The cameras caught everything. Leah watched as Mrs. Henderson approached the counter, apparently deciding that enough time had passed to resume her shopping. Jared immediately snapped to attention, his entire demeanor transforming into one of eager servitude. The contrast with his treatment of her was so stark, it was almost comical. "You know," she said to Christopher, "this isn't about me personally. It's about every person who's walked into that store and been judged based on their appearance. How many potential customers have they turned away? How many people have left feeling diminished?" "I know," Christopher responded, and she could hear the sound of traffic in the background as he neared the store. "That's exactly why this needs to be addressed immediately. We've worked too hard to build an inclusive brand to let this kind of behavior continue." Inside the boutique, Rachel had retreated to her office, leaving Jared to continue fawning over Mrs. Henderson. Neither of them seemed particularly concerned about Leah's phone call, their attitudes suggesting they'd dealt with similar threats before and emerged unscathed. "They're about to learn a very important lesson," Christopher said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had helped him build his retail empire. "I can see the store now. Give me 2 minutes." Leah ended the call, slipping her phone back into her bag. The sun had dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across Michigan Avenue. She remained perfectly still, a statue of dignity and composure, waiting for the moment when everything would change. The sleek black Tesla pulled up to the curb with barely a sound, its tinted windows reflecting the boutique's elegant facade. Christopher Matthews emerged first, his tall frame clothed in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit that spoke of quiet wealth and authority. Marcus Chen followed, tablet in hand, his expression grave as he reviewed what appeared to be security footage. Leah watched through the boutique's windows as Jared's attention shifted to the new arrivals, his eyes lighting up at the sight of 2 impeccably dressed men who fit his narrow definition of suitable customers. She could practically see him calculating potential commissions as Christopher and Marcus approached the entrance. The glass doors parted with a soft whisper, and Christopher stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding attention. The boutique's atmosphere shifted palpably. Even Mrs. Henderson and her friends fell silent, recognizing the aura of genuine power that surrounded him. "Welcome to Luminescence," Jared practically bounded forward, his voice dripping with the same obsequious charm he'd shown to Mrs. Henderson. "How can I assist you gentlemen today?" Christopher's dark eyes swept the store, taking in every detail while appearing to focus on nothing in particular. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying the polished accent of someone educated at Europe's finest schools, "I'm interested in understanding more about your customer service practices." Marcus stood slightly behind him, tablet still in hand, his presence adding weight to what was beginning to feel like an inspection rather than a casual shopping visit. Rachel, sensing something significant was occurring, emerged from her office with the wary expression of a manager who'd been caught unaware. "Of course, sir," Jared replied, practically preening under what he perceived as prestigious attention. "We pride ourselves on providing the highest level of service to our discerning clientele." "Interesting," Christopher mused, moving toward the counter where Leah's abandoned selections still lay. "And how do you determine who qualifies as discerning clientele?" Rachel stepped forward, her professional mask firmly in place. "We maintain certain standards," she began, unknowingly echoing her earlier words to Leah. "Our typical customers expect a particular atmosphere." "Ah, yes," Christopher interrupted smoothly. "Standards. Let's talk about those." He gestured to Marcus, who turned his tablet around to display the security footage from earlier. The screen showed Jared's dismissive treatment of Leah in crystal-clear detail. The color drained from both Jared and Rachel's faces as they watched the scene replay. Mrs. Henderson and her friends, still lingering near the sunglasses display, began to whisper among themselves, their expressions shifting from curiosity to discomfort as they realized the situation's gravity. Perhaps, Christopher continued, his voice carrying an edge of steel beneath its polished surface, you could explain how these standards justify treating any customer with such blatant disrespect. Before either employee could respond, the boutique's doors opened once more, and Leah stepped back inside. She moved to Christopher's side with quiet grace, her presence suddenly seeming to fill the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with inherent authority. I believe, she said, addressing Jared and Rachel directly, you both owe me an explanation for your behavior. Though I'm more interested in hearing how you plan to ensure this never happens to another customer. The realization hit Jared first, his face cycling through shock, horror, and mortification as he connected the dots. Rachel followed seconds later, her professional mask cracking completely as she understood exactly who she had been dismissing as unsuitable for her store. Mr. Matthews, she stammered, recognition flooding her features. We didn't... Clearly, Christopher cut in, his tone sharp but controlled. You didn't think, you didn't consider, you simply acted on prejudices that have no place in this company or in modern society. Marcus stepped forward, his tablet now displaying sales figures and customer demographic data. Our company was built on principles of inclusive luxury, he stated, his voice carrying the authority of his position. That every customer who walks through these doors deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. The security footage shows that you violated these core values repeatedly and deliberately. The boutique had fallen completely silent, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. Even the background music seemed to have faded away, as if the store itself was holding its breath, waiting to see how this moment of reckoning would play out. The silence in the boutique hung heavy as a storm cloud, pregnant with tension and inevitable consequences. Jared's usual confident posture had crumbled, his shoulders hunching inward as if trying to make himself smaller. Rachel stood rigid, her perfectly manicured hands clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles white with strain. Let's review exactly what happened here today, Christopher began, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone unused to being questioned. You saw my wife enter this store, a store that I own, that I built from the ground up, and you immediately decided she didn't belong here. Marcus tapped his tablet, and the security footage began playing again, this time on the boutique's large display screens typically used for fashion showcases. The crystal-clear video showed every dismissive glance, every contemptuous gesture, every moment of blatant discrimination played out in high definition. I particularly appreciate, Christopher continued, his tone taking on an edge of controlled anger, how you suggested she might be more comfortable at an outlet mall. Tell me, what exactly made you think she would be more comfortable there? Jared opened his mouth, then closed it again, no words emerging. His eyes darted between Christopher and Leah, the reality of his actions playing across his face like a tragic film. Rachel stepped forward, perhaps hoping to salvage something from the situation. Mr. Matthews, she began, her voice trembling slightly. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. No, Leah interrupted, her voice cutting through the excuses like a blade. There's been no misunderstanding. Your actions and intentions were perfectly clear. What's misunderstood is your conception of what luxury retail should be. Mrs. Henderson and her friends had begun to edge toward the door, their earlier voyeuristic interest replaced by evident discomfort. But Christopher's voice stopped them. Please stay, he said, without turning around. This is a lesson everyone in this store needs to hear. He moved to the counter where Leah's selected items still lay, running his fingers over the fine fabrics. These pieces, he said, are indeed expensive. They're crafted with exceptional skill, designed with artistic vision, and yes, they carry price tags that reflect their quality. But nowhere in their creation or marketing does it specify that they're only meant for certain types of people. Marcus stepped forward, his tablet now displaying company statistics. Luminescence was founded on the principle of accessible luxury, he stated firmly. Our customer base is diverse, representing various backgrounds, cultures, and experiences. This diversity is not just accepted, it's celebrated as core to our brand identity. Rachel's professional mask had cracked completely, tears welling in her eyes. I never meant, she began, but Christopher held up a hand. Intentions, he said quietly, are far less important than impact. The impact of your actions today goes far beyond this single incident. How many potential customers have you driven away? How many people have left this store feeling diminished, feeling unwelcome in a space that should celebrate their appreciation for beauty and craftsmanship? Leah moved to stand beside her husband, her presence commanding in its quiet dignity. I would like to hear, she said, addressing both Jared and Rachel directly, what you were thinking. Not excuses, not apologies. I want to understand the thought process that led you to treat me this way. The boutique's elegant lighting seemed to cast harsh shadows now, highlighting every nervous twitch and uncomfortable shift in the employees' postures. Jared looked as if he might be sick, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Jared's voice cracked, forcing him to start again. I made assumptions. I didn't see you. I saw what I expected to see, what I'd been trained to look for in high-end retail. And I was wrong. So terribly wrong. Rachel stepped forward, her professional demeanor stripped away to reveal raw shame. We've become accustomed to a certain type of client, she admitted, each word seeming to cost her. We've created an artificial boundary around luxury, deciding who belongs and who doesn't. It's inexcusable. Christopher nodded slowly, his expression grave. At least you're beginning to understand the magnitude of your error, but understanding isn't enough. There must be consequences. And more importantly, there must be change. Marcus had begun taking notes, his fingers moving rapidly across his tablet. Effective immediately, he announced. This location will undergo a complete staff retraining program. We will be reviewing all customer service protocols, with a particular focus on eliminating bias in customer interactions. The sun had begun to set outside the boutique's windows, casting long shadows across the scene. Mrs. Henderson and her friends stood frozen, their own complicity in maintaining these unspoken prejudices suddenly apparent in the harsh light of reality. Your employment status, Christopher continued, addressing Jared and Rachel, will be reviewed by our HR department. But regardless of that outcome, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how easily prejudice disguised itself as maintaining standards. Remember how quickly you judged someone's worth based on your own preconceptions. Leah finally moved to gather her selected items from the counter. These pieces, she said quietly, are still beautiful. Their value isn't diminished by who wears them, just as a person's value isn't determined by what they wear. That's a lesson this store seems to have forgotten. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the boutique, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of Michigan Avenue beyond the windows. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Jared and Rachel, but for everyone who had witnessed or participated in the subtle and not-so-subtle forms of discrimination that had been allowed to flourish in this space. The following morning dawned crisp and clear over Michigan Avenue, the early sunlight catching the windows of Luminescence Boutique at an angle that made them gleam like diamonds. Inside, a transformation was already underway. Marcus Chen stood before the assembled staff, including a visibly chastened Jared and Rachel, conducting the first of many mandatory training sessions on inclusive customer service. Yesterday's incident, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the space, has forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our culture here. This isn't just about one interaction or two employees. It's about the subtle ways we've allowed bias to influence our definition of luxury. The staff shifted uncomfortably in their seats, many avoiding eye contact. The previous evening's events had spread through the company like wildfire, becoming an immediate cautionary tale about the consequences of discrimination in high-end retail. In his downtown office, Christopher Matthews sat behind his desk, reviewing the comprehensive action plan his team had developed overnight. The incident with Leah had sparked more than just disciplinary action. It had catalyzed a company-wide examination of practices and policies. "We're implementing immediate changes," he explained to the board members gathered in his office. "Every store will undergo intensive bias training. We're revising our hiring practices, our customer service protocols, even our marketing strategies. Yesterday showed us that we've been complacent, allowing an outdated and exclusionary vision of luxury to persist." Leah, seated beside him in the boardroom, added her perspective with characteristic grace. "What happened to me isn't unique," she reminded them. "What's unique is that I was in a position to expose it. How many others have walked away, feeling unwelcome, feeling diminished?" Back at the boutique, the morning's training session continued. Marcus had brought in diversity consultants, experts in retail psychology, and customer service specialists. The message was clear. Change wasn't optional, it was imperative. "Luxury," one consultant explained to the attentive staff, "isn't about exclusion, it's about excellence, in products, in service, in human interaction. When we create artificial barriers, when we judge based on appearance rather than intention, we diminish not just our customers but ourselves." Jared, seated in the back row, hadn't slept much. The weight of his actions had kept him awake, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own prejudices. He'd spent hours scrolling through the company's website, reading about its founding principles, its commitment to inclusive luxury, its vision of a world where beauty and quality were accessible to all who appreciated them. Rachel, too, showed signs of profound reflection. The carefully maintained facade of the previous day had cracked, revealing someone grappling with the implications of her leadership style. She'd arrived early, already drafting new protocols for customer interaction, determined to be part of the solution rather than continuing the problem. In the afternoon, Christopher called an all-hands virtual meeting for every Luminescence employee nationwide. His face appeared on screens in break rooms and offices across the country, his message clear and uncompromising. "Yesterday's incident at our Michigan Avenue location has revealed a cancer in our corporate culture," he began. "We've allowed an insidious form of discrimination to hide behind words like exclusive and high-end. This ends now. Luxury isn't about keeping people out, it's about inviting them in to experience the best we have to offer." As evening approached, Leah returned to the boutique. This time, the reception was markedly different. Emma, who had witnessed the previous day's events in uncomfortable silence, rushed forward to greet her. The young woman's eyes were bright with unshed tears as she apologized for not speaking up, for being a passive participant in the discrimination. "The hardest part," Leah told her gently, "is recognizing our own complicity in these situations. The important thing is what we do with that recognition." The items she had selected the previous day had been carefully preserved, wrapped in tissue paper and waiting in the signature luminescence box. As she completed her purchase, helped by a subdued but courteous Jared, Leah noticed the new signs being installed throughout the store. "Luxury is for everyone who appreciates it." Outside, the evening light painted Michigan Avenue in soft golds and purples. Christopher waited by the car, watching as his wife emerged from the store carrying her purchases. "How did it feel?" he asked as she approached. Leah considered the question carefully. "Like a beginning," she replied. "One store, one incident, one moment of reckoning. But it's the ripples that matter. How this changes things going forward. How it affects other stores, other customers, other moments." In the days and weeks that followed, those ripples would indeed spread. The incident became a case study in corporate training programs, a catalyst for industry-wide discussions about inclusion in luxury retail. Jared and Rachel, though disciplined, were given the opportunity to be part of the change, their experience serving as a powerful testimony to the importance of confronting and correcting bias. The sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows across the prestigious shopping district. Inside Luminescence, the lights gleamed warmly, illuminating a space that was beginning to transform from exclusive to inclusive, from barriers to bridges. The designer clothes still carried their impressive price tags. The decor remained elegant and refined. But something fundamental had shifted, a recognition that true luxury isn't about keeping people out, but about welcoming them in. As Leah and Christopher drove home along Lakeshore Drive, the city lights twinkling like stars, they discussed the changes their company would continue to implement. The incident had forced them to confront uncomfortable truths, but it had also opened doors to necessary transformations. In the end, it wasn't just about one boutique or one interaction. It was about challenging the very notion of who belongs in spaces of luxury and excellence. The night settled over Chicago, but within Luminescence, a new day had already begun.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.